The emergency signal came through the quantum relay at exactly 800 hours Galactic Standard Time, and Admiral Kale felt his blood turn cold as he read the message on his command screen. The Vorthan Empire had finally made their move, and their massive war fleet was heading straight for the Nexus system, with enough firepower to glass 3 planets. Every coalition ship in the sector was being called to make their final stand at coordinates that would determine the fate of half the galaxy. Kale stood in the center of the coalition command ship's bridge, watching dozens of holographic displays show the approaching storm, and each red dot on the tactical screen represented a Vorthan dreadnought capable of cracking a moon in half. The enemy had been building this fleet for 10 years in the dark reaches of space beyond the galactic rim, and now they were coming to finish what they started when they first attacked the peaceful Zenthari colonies. Commander Veltar of the Altarian Navy stepped up beside the admiral with his forearms crossed in the traditional gesture of concern, and his crystalline features reflected the blue light from the tactical displays. The Altarians were proud warriors who had never lost a battle in their 3,000-year history. But even Veltar looked worried as he studied the enemy formation approaching through hyperspace. Admiral, the preliminary scans show at least 200 Vorthan ships, including 12 of their new Dreadnought-class vessels, and our combined forces number only 150 ships. Veltar reported in his melodic voice that somehow managed to sound both beautiful and grim at the same time. The mathematical probability of victory stands at approximately 7%, assuming optimal tactical deployment and favorable environmental conditions. Admiral Kale nodded grimly as he processed this information and turned to face the holographic representatives of the other coalition species who had gathered for this emergency war council. General Thakran of the Corvan military caste stood at attention with his massive frame towering over everyone else, while his tusked face showed the kind of fierce determination that had made his people legendary shock troops across the galaxy. Beside him floated the ethereal form of Wise One Zenthara, whose ancient mind held more tactical knowledge than most military computers. We have received word from our allies across the sector, and every available ship is being diverted to the Nexus system, Admiral Kale announced to the assembled commanders. The Rigelian Third Fleet will arrive in 6 hours, and the Centauri Defense Force is pushing their engines to maximum burn to reach us in time, but we must face the reality that we are outnumbered and outgunned. General Thakran slammed his fist on the tactical table with enough force to make the holographic displays flicker, and his deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. Then we die with honor and take as many of those Vorthan dogs with us as possible, and our sacrifice will inspire others to continue the fight against their tyranny. Wise One. Zenthara's form shimmered as she processed countless tactical scenarios in her ancient mind before speaking in her whisper-soft voice that somehow carried to every corner of the bridge. There may be another option, though it requires us to consider assistance from an unexpected source, and I have just received a communication request from the recently contacted world called Earth. The bridge fell silent as every being present turned to stare at the Zenthari elder, and Admiral Kale felt his stomach drop because Earth meant the humans, and the humans were the newest species to make contact with the Coalition just 6 months ago. Their technology was laughably primitive by galactic standards, and their single experimental warship was built using fusion drives and kinetic weapons that belonged in a museum rather than a modern battlefield. Surely you cannot be serious about involving the humans in this battle, Commander Veltar said, with his crystalline features shifting to display what his species considered polite disbelief. Their ship is constructed from materials that predate quantum metallurgy, and their weapon systems operate on principles that most civilized species abandoned millennia ago. Admiral Kale rubbed his temples as he considered the implications of what Zenthara was suggesting, and the truth was that every ship would matter in the coming battle, even if that ship was crewed by primitives who barely understood the basics of space warfare. Put the communication through and let us hear what the humans have to say. The main display flickered, and suddenly the bridge was looking at a human male standing in what appeared to be the command center of their ship, and Admiral Kale had to admit that despite their primitive technology, the humans had managed to create something that looked surprisingly professional. The man wore a dark blue uniform with simple rank insignia, and his black hair was cut short in a military style that suggested discipline and order. Greetings, Coalition Command. This is Captain Lee Dae-ho of the Earth warship Indomitable, requesting permission to join the defense fleet at the Nexus system, the human said in accented but clear galactic standard, and his voice carried the kind of quiet confidence that came from experience in dangerous situations. We received your emergency broadcast, and Earth Command has authorized us to render whatever assistance we can provide. Commander Veltar made a sound that was the Altarian equivalent of laughing, and his crystalline features displayed open amusement at the human's request. Captain Lee, your species has been in contact with the Coalition for less than one rotation of your homeworld, and your ship appears to be constructed from primitive alloys using outdated propulsion systems, and we appreciate your offer, but this battle requires vessels capable of engaging Vorthan dreadnoughts. Captain Lee's expression did not change as he listened to the Altarian's dismissal, and when he spoke again, his voice remained calm and steady. Commander Veltar, with respect, we did not travel 47 light years just to watch from the sidelines, and the Indomitable may not look like much, but she has capabilities that might surprise you. Admiral Kale studied the human captain through the display and noticed details that others might miss, including the way Lee held himself, with the bearing of someone who had commanded others in life or death situations, and the subtle tension in his shoulders that suggested a man ready for action. Behind the captain, he could see other humans moving efficiently around their bridge, and their movements had the practiced coordination of a veteran crew. Captain Lee, what exactly are you proposing? Admiral Kale asked directly, because there was something about this human that demanded straight talk rather than diplomatic dancing. Your ship masses perhaps 1/10 of a Vorthon frigate, and your weapons appear to be limited to kinetic projectiles and conventional explosives. Lee stepped closer to his communication console, and for a moment, his dark eyes seemed to look directly at Admiral Kale through the quantum relay connection. Admiral, we may not have plasma cannons or quantum torpedoes, but we have something else that might prove valuable, and we have unpredictability. General Thokron's tusked face twisted into what might have been a grin as he considered the human's words. Unpredictability is indeed a weapon that can turn the tide of battle, and perhaps these humans deserve a chance to prove their worth, wise one. Zenthara's ethereal form pulsed with thoughtful light as she processed this new information, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of prophecy. There are currents in the quantum foam that suggest unexpected variables may indeed influence the outcome of this engagement, and perhaps we should not dismiss any potential ally, no matter how unusual their methods. Admiral Kale made his decision with the kind of speed that had earned him his rank, and he knew that desperate times called for desperate measures. Captain Lee, you have permission to join the defense fleet, but understand that we cannot guarantee your safety, and the Vorthan Empire shows no mercy to those who oppose them. The human captain's face showed no fear as he received this news, and instead he seemed almost eager for what was coming. Admiral, we understand the risks, and we did not come here expecting guarantees, and Earth sent one ship to this fleet battle, and we intend to make it count. The communication ended, and Admiral Kale found himself staring at the empty display while wondering if he had just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward an impossible victory. The Vorthan fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts descending upon the Nexus system, and Captain Lee Dae-ho watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as sensors counted 200 enemy vessels, including the massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed every other ship in the sector. The enemy formation moved with mechanical precision through the void, and their dark hulls absorbed the light from the system's twin stars, while weapon ports glowed with the ominous red light of charging plasma cannons. Commander Park Ji-woo stood at the tactical station with her fingers dancing across holographic controls as she analyzed the approaching threat, and her face remained calm despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Park had served with Lee during their time in the Korean Navy, and she understood better than anyone how to read the patterns in enemy formations that others might miss. Captain, the Vorthan fleet is maintaining standard battle formation with dreadnoughts in the center, protected by screening vessels, Park reported while updating the tactical display with color-coded threat assessments. Coalition forces are moving to intercept using conventional defensive patterns, but the enemy has significant advantages in both firepower and defensive capabilities. Lee studied the main display where red and blue icons represented the two fleets, converging on each other like ancient armies meeting on a digital battlefield. And he could see immediately that the coalition commanders were thinking in terms of traditional space warfare. The Altarian ships formed elegant attack formations, while the Corvin vessels grouped together for maximum firepower concentration, and the Zenthari ships positioned themselves to provide support with their advanced sensor systems. Lieutenant Kim, Sora looked up from the engineering console where she had been monitoring the ship's fusion reactor, and her young face showed the kind of intense concentration that came from knowing that everyone's life depended on her keeping the systems running. Kim was barely 25 years old, but she had already proven herself capable of performing miracles with equipment that most engineers would consider hopeless. Captain, the Newton drive is operating at optimal parameters, and I have managed to squeeze an additional 12% efficiency from the reactor by adjusting the magnetic containment fields. Kim reported with obvious pride in her work. We may not be able to match their speed, but we can maintain acceleration longer than most ships our size. Navigator Han Woo-jin called out from his station, where multiple displays showed the complex gravitational dance of planets and asteroids that filled the Nexus system. Captain, I am detecting unusual solar activity from the primary star, and there will be significant particle radiation in sectors 7 through 12 within the next 40 minutes. The first exchange of fire lit up the space between the two fleets, like a deadly fireworks display, and the coalition ships opened with their most powerful weapons, while the Vorthons responded with plasma volleys that turned the void into a hellscape of energy and destruction. Several coalition vessels disappeared in brilliant explosions, while others limped away trailing atmosphere and debris. But the enemy formation continued its relentless advance without even slowing down. Weapons Officer Choi Min-ho watched the battle unfold from his station while his hands hovered over the firing controls for the Indomitable's crude but effective armament. Captain, the coalition weapons are having minimal effect on Vorthon shields, and their return fire is devastating our frontline vessels. Dr. Yoon Hai-young suddenly looked up from her science station with an expression of intense concentration as she processed the data flowing in from the ship's sensors. Captain, I am detecting something unusual about the Vorthon weapon signatures, and their plasma cannons operate on very specific frequency modulations that follow predictable patterns. Lee moved to stand behind Yoon's station while she pulled up. Detailed analysis of the enemy weapon systems and her discovery could change everything about how they approached this battle. Explain what you mean by predictable patterns, Doctor. Yoon manipulated the holographic display to show waveform analysis of the Vorthon plasma weapons, and her excitement was obvious as she pointed out the recurring mathematical sequences. Captain, their weapon systems appear to be designed for maximum efficiency rather than tactical flexibility, and each plasma cannon follows a charging cycle that takes exactly 47 seconds from firing to full readiness. The implications of this discovery hit Lee immediately, and he realized that the enemy's technological superiority might also be their weakness, because they had become dependent on systems that prioritized power over adaptability. Can you predict when specific ships will be vulnerable to attack? Dr. Shin Ye-jin looked up from her medical station where she had been monitoring the crew's vital signs during the intense acceleration maneuvers, and her concern was evident as she studied the readouts. Captain, the G-forces we are experiencing are approaching the limits of human tolerance, and prolonged exposure could result in loss of consciousness or worse. Lee nodded acknowledgement of the medical officer's warning, but his attention remained focused on the tactical situation developing around them, and he could see that the coalition fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought with clockwork precision. Dr. Shin, how long can we maintain these acceleration levels? The medical officer consulted her instruments before responding with the kind of clinical precision that came from years of emergency medicine experience. Human physiology can withstand these forces for approximately 30 minutes before cognitive impairment becomes significant, and our crew appears to be handling the stress better than expected. Communications Officer Jung Da-eun suddenly raised her hand to get the captain's attention while she listened to something through her headset. Captain, I am intercepting Vorthon battle communications, and their command structure appears to be highly centralized with all tactical decisions flowing through the flagship. Lee felt the pieces of a plan beginning to form in his mind as he processed all the information his crew was gathering, and he realized that the humans had advantages that no one else recognized because they thought differently about warfare. Jung, can you identify the command frequencies they are using? The communications officer nodded while her fingers worked to isolate the enemy transmissions from the chaos of battle signals filling the electromagnetic spectrum. Captain, their communications follow rigid protocols with specific authorization codes required for major tactical changes, and there appears to be a delay of several minutes between command decisions and fleet implementation. Admiral Kale's voice crackled through the ship's communication system as he broadcast orders to all coalition vessels, and his tone carried the weight of a commander watching his forces being systematically dismantled. All ships maintain defensive formations and concentrate fire on Vorthon screening vessels, but avoid direct engagement with dreadnoughts until we can coordinate a concentrated assault. Lee looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and saw the same determination that had carried them through countless dangerous missions during their time in Earth's Navy. Jiwoo, what is our current position relative to the main battle? Commander Park consulted her tactical display before responding with the kind of calm professionalism that made her invaluable in crisis situations. Captain, we are positioned in the rear guard approximately 50,000 kilometers behind the main coalition line, and Admiral Kale has assigned us to protect the medical ships and supply vessels. The assignment was clearly meant to keep the primitive human ship out of the way while the real warships handled the serious fighting, and Lee understood the logic behind the decision, even if he disagreed with it. Sora, how much power can you divert from non-essential systems to the engines? The young engineer's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that came from being asked to do something that regulations said was impossible. Captain, I can give you another 15% thrust by shutting down secondary life support and reducing artificial gravity to minimum levels, but the crew will need to secure for extreme maneuvers. Lee made his decision with the speed that had kept him alive during submarine operations in Earth's oceans, and he knew that following conventional tactics would only get them killed along with everyone else. All hands prepare for combat acceleration and secure all stations for extreme maneuvers. He turned to face his crew and saw the trust in their eyes as they waited for orders that would determine whether they lived or died in the next few minutes. We are not going to sit in the back and watch our allies get slaughtered, and we are going hunting. The Indomitable broke away from the coalition rearguard like a predator separating from the herd, and Captain Lee felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet as Lieutenant Kim pushed the fusion reactor beyond its designed limits. The ship's hull groaned under the stress of acceleration that would have torn apart most vessels, but the human engineers had built their warship to withstand punishment that would destroy more elegant designs. Commander Park watched the tactical display as their ship moved into attack position, and she could see the confusion spreading through both fleets as the small human vessel abandoned conventional formation warfare. Captain, the Vorthon vessels are not adjusting their targeting solutions to account for our movement, and they appear to consider us a negligible threat. Lee smiled grimly as he realized that the enemy's arrogance would be their first advantage, because the Vorthons had dismissed Earth's ship as too primitive to matter in a real battle. Excellent. Then they will not see us coming until it is too late, and Wu Jin plot an intercept course for the enemy screening vessels using the asteroid field for cover. Navigator Han Wu Jin's fingers flew across his console as he calculated a path through the dangerous maze of spinning rocks that filled this section of the Nexus system. Captain, the gravitational fields are extremely complex, but I can use them to slingshot us past the enemy sensors, and the asteroids will mask our approach until we are within weapons range. Dr. Yoon Hae-young looked up from her science station with data that could change everything about their attack plan.
Captain, I have completed analysis of the Vorthon shield systems, and they are calibrated to deflect high-energy plasma weapons, but they appear vulnerable to kinetic impacts at specific resonance frequencies. The discovery sent a surge of excitement
through the bridge crew, because their primitive kinetic weapons might actually be more effective than the advanced energy weapons that the coalition forces were using. Lee moved to study Yoon's analysis, while the ship shuddered through another course correction that brought them closer to their targets. Can you identify the optimal impact velocity and angle for maximum shield penetration? Lee asked while watching the enemy formation grow larger on the main display. Dr. Yoon manipulated her holographic models to show the shield harmonics in three-dimensional detail, and her excitement was obvious as she pointed out the weak points. Captain, the shields collapse completely when struck by objects massing more than 50 kilograms traveling at velocities exceeding 15,000 meters per second at angles between 37 and 43 degrees relative to the hull surface. Lieutenant Kim So-ra suddenly called out from her engineering station, where warning lights were flashing red across multiple system displays. Captain, I am reading massive power fluctuations in the primary reactor, and we are approaching critical temperature thresholds in the magnetic containment system. Lee knew that pushing their ship this hard was dangerous, but they needed every advantage. They could get against an enemy that outgunned them by orders of magnitude. How long can you maintain current power levels? The young engineer consulted her instruments while her hands moved constantly across the control interface to fine-tune the reactor's performance. Captain, I can hold these levels for approximately 20 minutes, but after that we will need to reduce power or risk containment failure. Weapons Officer Choi Min-ho studied the approaching enemy vessels through his targeting systems, and his professional assessment was both encouraging and terrifying. Captain, the lead Vorthon frigate masses approximately 10 times our displacement, but their weapons are designed for long-range engagement, and they will have difficulty tracking us at close range. Communications Officer Young Da-eun suddenly raised her hand to get everyone's attention, while she processed the enemy transmissions flowing through her headset. Captain, I am detecting increased chatter on Vorthon command frequencies, and they are requesting instructions on how to deal with our unconventional approach. The fact that the enemy was confused by human tactics gave Lee hope that they might actually survive the next few minutes, and he realized that centuries of warfare on Earth had taught humanity to think creatively about combat. What kind of response are they receiving from their command ship? Young listened carefully to the alien voices speaking in their harsh language before translating for the bridge crew. Captain, their commanders are ordering them to maintain current formations and engage according to standard protocols, and there appears to be significant delay between questions and responses. Lee understood immediately that the enemy's rigid command structure was another weakness they could exploit, because human military doctrine emphasized individual initiative and rapid decision-making. Prepare to engage the first target with a full spread of kinetic torpedoes and aim for the shield generators that Yoon identified. The Indomitable emerged from the asteroid field like a shark rising from dark water, and suddenly they were among the enemy screening vessels with their primitive weapons locked onto targets that had never faced anything like human ingenuity. The Vorthon ships tried to bring their plasma cannons to bear, but the human vessel was moving too fast and too unpredictably for their targeting computers to track. Choi fired the first salvo of kinetic torpedoes, and the simple projectiles streaked across space toward their target, while the enemy ship's shields flared to life in response to the incoming threat. The torpedoes struck the Vorthon frigate's shields at precisely the angle and velocity that Dr. Yoon had calculated, and the energy barriers collapsed like soap bubbles touched by fire. The follow-up impacts sent massive explosions rippling across the enemy ship's hull as the kinetic energy transferred into heat and pressure that tore through armor plating designed to stop plasma beams. The Vorthon frigate listed to starboard as secondary explosions destroyed its weapon systems and left it drifting helplessly in space. Lieutenant Kim called out a warning as enemy plasma bolts began tracking toward their position. Captain, multiple fourth-hand ships are targeting us, and their weapons will reach us in 30 seconds. Lee felt the familiar calm that came over him during combat situations as time seemed to slow down and every detail became crystal clear. Woojin emergency evasion pattern Delta, and use the disabled ship's hull as cover. The navigator's hands moved with practiced precision as he threw the Indomitable into a spiraling dive that carried them behind the crippled Vorthon vessel, just as plasma bolts lit up the space where they had been moments before. The enemy fire struck their own disabled ship and finished the destruction that human weapons had begun. Dr. Shin Ye-jin monitored her instruments as the crew endured crushing G-forces that would have killed most alien species, but the humans gritted their teeth and continued performing their duties. Captain, we are approaching the limits of human tolerance, but the crew remains functional. Commander Park studied the tactical situation as more enemy ships moved to intercept their position, and her analysis showed both opportunity and danger. Captain, we have demonstrated that our weapons can penetrate Vorthen shields, but we are now facing coordinated response from multiple vessels. Lee realized that they had proven their point about human capabilities, but now they needed to survive long enough to exploit their advantages. Jiwoo transmit our attack data to Admiral Kale and recommend that coalition forces target the shield generators with kinetic weapons. The communication system crackled with Admiral Kale's voice as he processed the information that the humans had gathered during their attack. Indomitable, this is Coalition Command and your tactical data has been received, but you are ordered to withdraw from the combat zone immediately. Lee looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and saw the same determination that had brought them across 47 light-years to fight beside aliens they barely knew. Admiral, with respect, we are just getting started. Captain Lee made a decision that would have horrified any sane military commander, as he ordered Lieutenant Kim to begin systematically overloading the ship's systems in ways that violated every safety protocol ever written. The Indomitable's hull groaned under stresses that should have torn it apart, while the fusion reactor ran at 130% of rated capacity and emergency klaxons wailed throughout the ship. Captain, the magnetic containment fields are fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters, and we are approaching cascade failure in the primary power grid, Kim reported, while her hands moved frantically across control interfaces that were never designed for this kind of abuse. I can give you 10 more minutes at current power levels before we start losing critical systems. Lee studied the tactical display where the battle was turning into a massacre as Vorthen dreadnoughts methodically destroyed coalition ships that were too slow to escape their devastating firepower. Then we make those 10 minutes count and prepare to jettison the escape pods. Commander Park looked up from her tactical station with confusion evident on her face because escape pods were meant to save lives, not serve as weapons. Captain, the pods only carry basic life support and navigation systems. Dr. Yoon Hae-young suddenly understood what Lee was planning, and her scientific mind immediately began calculating the possibilities. Captain, if we remove the life support equipment and replace it with explosives, the pods could function as guided missiles. The idea was insane by any military standard, but Lee had learned during his submarine service that desperate situations required creative solutions. Kim, can you modify the pod guidance systems to lock onto specific targets? The young engineer's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that came from being asked to attempt the impossible. Captain, I can reprogram the navigation computers and slave them to our targeting system, but the modifications will take at least 15 minutes. Lee felt the weight of time pressing down on him as he watched more coalition ships disappear in brilliant explosions while the enemy formation continued its relentless advance. Do it and Choi prepare conventional torpedoes for close-range engagement, Navigator Han Woo-jin called out from his station where he was tracking the movement of both fleets through the complex gravitational environment of the Nexus system. Captain, the Vorthen flagship has moved to the center of their formation, and it appears to be coordinating the entire battle from that position. The massive dreadnought was 3 kilometers long and bristled with enough firepower to level a city, but Lee realized that its size might also be its weakness, because something that large would have enormous power distribution networks. Yoon, can you analyze the flagship's power signature? Dr. Yoon's instruments focused on the enemy command ship, while she processed terabytes of sensor data flowing through the ship's computers. Captain, the dreadnought requires massive energy distribution to maintain shields and weapons across its entire hull, and I am detecting multiple reactor cores linked through a complex power grid. Lee saw the opportunity immediately, because complex systems had more failure points than simple ones, and human military doctrine had always emphasized attacking the enemy's weak spots rather than their strengths. Can you identify vulnerabilities in their power distribution network? The science officer manipulated her holographic displays to show the energy patterns flowing through the massive ship, and her excitement was obvious as she found what they were looking for. Captain, there are junction points where multiple power conduits converge, and a cascade failure at any of these locations could disable large sections of the ship. Communications Officer Jung Da-un suddenly interrupted with urgent news from the Coalition fleet. Captain Admiral Kale is requesting immediate assistance and the Altarian flagship has taken critical damage. Lee looked at the main display where he could see the beautiful crystalline ship listing badly, while atmosphere streamed from multiple hull breaches, and he knew that losing the Altarians would break the Coalition's spirit. Wu Jin plotted an intercept course for the ships attacking the Altarian flagship. The navigator's hands flew across his console as he calculated a path through the chaos of battle that would bring them within weapons range of the enemy vessels. Captain, the course will take us directly through the crossfire between multiple Vorthan ships. Dr. Shinye Jin looked up from her medical station where she had been monitoring the crew's condition during the extreme maneuvers, and her concern was evident. Captain, the stress levels are approaching dangerous thresholds and prolonged exposure could result in permanent physiological damage. Lee understood the risks, but he also knew that they were fighting for more than just their own survival because the outcome of this battle would determine the fate of every free species in the galaxy. How much longer can we maintain these conditions? The medical officer consulted her instruments before responding with clinical precision. Captain, human physiology can endure these stresses for perhaps another 20 minutes before cognitive function begins to deteriorate significantly. Lieutenant Kim called out from engineering as sparks flew from overloaded control panels throughout the ship. Captain, I have completed modifications to 6 escape pods, and they are ready for deployment as guided missiles, but the targeting system will only work at close range. Lee made the kind of decision that separated great commanders from competent ones as he committed his ship to a suicidal attack run against the most heavily defended target in the enemy fleet. All hands prepare for maximum acceleration and secure for extreme maneuvers. The Indomitable turned toward the Vorthan flagship, like a dart thrown at a giant, and Lee could feel the deck plates vibrating under his feet as the fusion reactor pushed beyond every safety limit. Kim, transfer all available power to engines and shields. The young engineer's voice was strained as she fought to keep critical systems online while the ship's hull groaned under impossible stresses. Captain, I am shutting down life support 2E. Secondary compartments and reducing artificial gravity to minimum levels. Commander Park watched their approach on the tactical display, while enemy ships converged on their position from multiple directions. Captain, we are drawing fire from at least 12 Vorthan vessels, and their combined firepower will overwhelm our shields within minutes. Lee studied the tactical situation and realized that they had one chance to reach their target before the enemy destroyed them. Wu Jin used the gas giant's gravity well to slingshot us past their defensive perimeter. The navigator executed a maneuver that violated every rule of safe spaceflight as he sent the ship diving toward the massive planet's atmospheric boundary while using gravitational forces to accelerate them beyond normal engine capabilities. The ship shuddered through the gravity gradient while hull temperature gauges climbed toward critical levels. Dr. Yoon suddenly looked up from her science station with critical information about their target. Captain, I have identified the primary power junction on the Vorthan flagship, and it is located approximately 200 meters aft of their main bridge. Lee realized that they had found the enemy's Achilles heel, but reaching it would require getting closer to the dreadnought than any sane pilot would attempt. Kim, are the modified escape pods ready for deployment? The engineer's hands moved across her control panel as she armed the improvised missiles that would either save the Coalition fleet or provide a spectacular funeral pyre for the Indomitable. Captain, all 6 pods are ready and locked onto the target coordinates that Dr. Yoon provided. The massive Vorthan flagship grew larger on the main display as they approached at velocities that made precise targeting almost impossible, but Lee had faith in his crew's ability to perform miracles under pressure. Choi, fire all pods on my mark and target the power junction. The Indomitable screamed past the enemy dreadnought's defensive perimeter while plasma bolts lit up space around them, and Lee felt time slow down as he waited for the perfect moment to strike at the heart of the enemy fleet. The modified escape pods streaked toward the Vorthan flagship like 6 arrows fired by an invisible archer, and Captain Lee watched the tactical display as his improvised missiles closed the distance to their target at impossible speed. The enemy point defense systems tried desperately to intercept the small projectiles, but human engineering had made them too fast and too unpredictable for alien targeting computers designed to stop conventional weapons. Lieutenant Kim Sora gripped her engineering console as the ship's fusion reactor finally reached the breaking point and began shutting down secondary systems to prevent a catastrophic explosion. Captain, we are experiencing cascade failures throughout the power grid, and I cannot maintain current acceleration for more than 60 seconds. The first escape pod struck the Vorthan Dreadnought's hull exactly where Dr. Yoon had predicted the main power junction would be, and the explosion sent a brilliant flash of light across the massive ship's surface. For a moment nothing seemed to happen, and Lee wondered if their desperate gamble had failed. But then secondary explosions began rippling along the enemy flagship's hull as power conduits overloaded and destroyed themselves. Commander Park monitored the tactical sensors as the chain reaction spread through the 3-kilometer-long warship, and her voice carried amazement as she reported what was happening. Captain, the enemy flagship is experiencing massive power failures and multiple weapon systems are going offline. The sight of their invincible command ship suddenly going dark sent shockwaves through the Vorthon fleet, and Lee could see confusion spreading through their perfect formations as ship commanders waited for orders that would never come. The rigid command structure that had been their strength became their weakness as subordinate officers found themselves unable to adapt to a situation that their doctrine had never anticipated. Dr. Yoon Ha-young looked up from her science station with readings that confirmed their incredible success. Captain, the flagship's main reactor is shutting down and I am detecting atmospheric venting from multiple hull breaches, and the ship appears to be dead in space. Communications officer Jung Da-eun suddenly called out with urgent information about the enemy fleet's response to losing their command ship. Captain, I am intercepting Vorthan transmissions and multiple ships are requesting new orders, but there is no response from the flagship. Lee realized that they had accomplished something that military strategists would study for centuries because a single primitive ship had crippled the most advanced warship in the galaxy through pure human audacity. Jung broadcast our attack data to all coalition forces and recommend immediate assault on confused enemy vessels. Admiral Kale's voice crackled through the communication system, and his tone carried disbelief mixed with growing hope as he processed what the humans had achieved. Indomitable, this is Coalition Command, and we are confirming that the Vorthon flagship has been neutralized, but how did you accomplish this with primitive weapons? Navigator Han Woo-jin called out a warning as his sensors detected movement throughout the enemy formation. Captain, multiple Vorthan ships are breaking formation, and several vessels appear to be attempting to retreat. The psychological impact of seeing their unbeatable command ship reduced to a drifting hulk was destroying the Vorthan fleet's morale faster than any weapon could have managed, and Lee understood that they had won a victory that went far beyond simple military tactics. Ji-woo, coordinate with coalition forces to pursue retreating vessels and prevent their escape. Lieutenant Kim managed to stabilize the ship's power systems just enough to keep them operational as the Indomitable limped away from the crippled dreadnought. Captain, I have restored partial power to engines and life support, but we will need extensive repairs before attempting any major maneuvers. Dr. Shin Yejin moved among the bridge crew, checking their condition after the extreme stress they had endured during the attack run, and her medical assessment showed the incredible resilience of human physiology. Captain, the crew has suffered no permanent damage despite experiencing G-forces that would have incapacitated most alien species. Lee looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and saw the exhaustion mixed with pride that came from accomplishing something that everyone had thought was impossible. Excellent work, everyone, and we have just proven that Earth deserves a place among the stars. The tactical display showed the complete collapse of Vorthon resistance as their remaining ships fled in disorder, while coalition forces pursued them across the Nexus system, and the sight of the mighty enemy fleet running away would become legendary throughout the galaxy. Choi, signal the coalition fleet that we are available to assist with cleanup operations. Commander Park studied the aftermath of the battle, while compiling data that would revolutionize military thinking across a dozen species. Captain, our attack has destroyed the enemy's command and control capabilities, and their technological advantages mean nothing without coordination. Admiral Kale requested permission to come aboard the Indomitable to personally thank the crew that had saved the coalition from certain defeat and Lee granted the request while wondering how history would remember this day. All hands prepare to receive Admiral Kale and make this ship presentable for our distinguished guest. Dr. Yoon organized her sensor data into a comprehensive report that would become required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy, and her analysis showed exactly how human unpredictability had overcome superior technology. Captain, I have documented our entire attack sequence, and the tactical innovations we employed could change the nature of space warfare. The Coalition fleet began regrouping around the disabled Vorthon flagship, while salvage teams prepared to board the massive ship and recover intelligence that would help prevent future attacks. Young continued monitoring enemy communications as the retreating Vorthon ships reported their defeat to commanders who would struggle to understand how their perfect war machine had been broken by primitives. Lieutenant Kim began the long process of repairing systems that had been pushed far beyond their design limits during the battle, and her preliminary assessment showed that human engineering was more robust than anyone had expected. Captain, the ship will need dock time for major repairs, but we can return to Earth under our own power. Admiral Kale's shuttle docked with the Indomitable, and Lee prepared to meet the alien commander who would soon become one of humanity's greatest advocates in the galactic community. All hands attention on deck for Admiral Kale. The Altarian commander entered the human ship's bridge with his crystalline features displaying profound respect as he looked around at the primitive but effective technology that had saved his fleet. Captain Lee, your crew has achieved something that military historians will study for generations. Lee stood at attention while his crew remained at their stations because there was still work to be done despite their incredible victory. Admiral, we simply use the tools available to us, and human military doctrine has always emphasized improvisation over overwhelming force. Admiral Kale studied the humans with new understanding, as he realized that Earth species brought capabilities to the galaxy that no one had previously imagined. Captain Lee, I am prepared to recommend that Earth be granted full membership in the Coalition Defense Force, with immediate effect. The offer was more than Lee had dared hope for when they first left Earth, but he understood that they had earned their place through courage and innovation rather than advanced technology. Admiral, we accept your offer, and Earth is prepared to contribute whatever resources are necessary to maintain galactic peace. Dr. Shin completed her medical reports, showing that humans could function effectively under conditions that would disable other species, and her data would lead to revolutionary changes in spacecraft design. Commander Park finished her tactical analysis, demonstrating how unconventional thinking could overcome technological disadvantages, and her work would become the foundation for new military doctrines. The communication system activated with a priority message from Earth Command, and Lee smiled as he recognized the voice of his former commanding officer. Indomitable, this is Earth Command, and we have received reports of your actions at the Nexus system, and the entire planet is proud of what you have accomplished. Lee looked out at the stars, knowing that humanity had just taken its first step toward becoming a major power in the galaxy, and the future held possibilities that no one could have imagined just days before. Earth Command, this is Captain Lee reporting mission accomplished and request permission to return home. The response came back immediately with enthusiasm that could be felt across light years of space. Permission granted, Captain, and the fleet. Construction program has been approved, and how many ships do you need? Lee felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he realized that Earth would soon have a real fleet capable of defending human interests throughout the galaxy. Command, send us the materials and we will figure out the rest.